The last known images of Lena Hart and Callum Ward were taken at 4:17 p.m., the sun still warm on their faces, Yosemite stretching endlessly behind them. At first glance they looked like any couple excited for a weekend escape. 2 backpacks, a shared smile, a trailhead marker framed perfectly in the background. But hours later, investigators would describe those photos as unsettling, as if the final pieces of a puzzle no one yet knew was missing. Lena had taken most of them. She always did. Her phone was filled with small moments. Moss on bark, a butterfly wing, the curve of Callum's grin when he wasn't aware she was watching. She liked to freeze the world so she could remember it exactly as it felt. That afternoon, she framed Callum beside a cluster of tall pines, catching the way the shadows sliced across his face. "Hold still," she murmured, stepping backward on the dusty trail. "I am still," Callum replied, half laughing. "You're the one moving." His voice carried a familiar warmth, but there was a tightness beneath it, a tension Lena recognized, though she tried not to react. They had argued 2 days before. Something petty at first, something that grew larger than it should have. The apology was given, accepted, smoothed over, yet not forgotten. Still, she clicked the shutter. "You look good," she said softly. Callum shrugged, tightening the straps on his backpack. "Let's get moving before it gets dark." They began the ascent, their footsteps crunching through dry pine needles. The trail was narrow, slanting upward, but the forest felt welcoming, golden light filtering through branches, the scent of damp earth rising beneath them. Lena breathed it in, letting nature quiet the leftover fragments of worry in her chest. "Do you think the weather will hold?" she asked. Callum glanced at the sky. Forecast said a chance of rain, but that's for tomorrow. "We'll be at camp long before then." His certainty soothed her, even though she noticed how often he checked the map tucked into the side pocket of his pack. He wanted this trip to go right. Maybe that was why he was trying so hard to pretend nothing was wrong. As the trail flattened, Lena paused to take another picture. Sun-drenched granite, distant ridges fading into faint blue. She lifted her phone, capturing the moment. But when she reviewed the photo, her attention snagged on the reflection in Callum's eyes. Something unreadable, a quiet storm she could sense but not name. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Yeah," he said, though he was looking at the trail ahead, not the scenery. They pushed deeper into the wilderness, their conversation drifting in and out like the breeze. Sometimes they walked in companionable silence, other times their words felt forced, each trying to bridge a distance neither admitted existed. Near dusk, they stopped at a small clearing to rest. Lena recorded a short video, just 3 seconds. Callum kneeling to retie his boot, the sound of her soft laugh in the background, the camera wobbling as she brushed hair from her face. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. But it would later play again and again in the ranger station, investigators studying every flicker for meaning. "You hungry?" Callum asked, slinging his pack down. "A little. Eat something now. Trail gets steeper past this point." She nodded and reached for a granola bar, watching him as he folded the map open against his knee. The lines troubled him. She could see it in the little crease between his brows. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "It's fine. Come on, we should get moving." Lena hesitated, glancing back at the fading sunset. A small knot of unease tightened in her stomach, but she followed him anyway. She always had. Before they left the clearing, she took one last photo, Callum walking ahead, silhouette dark against the growing twilight. The image was grainy, slightly blurred, but it captured something real, the space widening between them, the shadowed forest waiting. Hours later, it would become their final timestamp. And by morning, the trail behind them would be washed clean. By the time Lena and Callum left the clearing, twilight had thinned into a cool, pale blue. Their last photo, Callum's silhouette fading into the darkening trail, lingered in Lena's thoughts as she followed him upward. The air carried the scent of cold granite and pine sap, and every sound felt sharper. The crackle of twigs, the distant rush of water, the faint cry of something hidden deep within the forest. Callum moved with determined strides, the map tucked against his chest as if it were a compass guiding more than their route. Lena noticed again how tightly he held it, How often he glanced at it even when the path seemed obvious. "You're sure this isn't a restricted trail?" Lena asked, stepping over a fallen branch. "It's not restricted," Callum replied, though his tone carried the same too-quick certainty she'd heard earlier. "It's just less traveled." "Less traveled than what?" "Our original plan. But this one leads to a ridge with a better view. Trust me, okay?" She did trust him, or she wanted to. But the forest changed subtly as they continued, shadows growing deeper, the trail thinning to a ribbon cut through brush and tilted rock. Lena tried to shake the feeling creeping up her spine. This was Yosemite. Families hiked here every day. People took pictures, posted them online, came back smiling and whole. This wasn't supposed to be dangerous. Still, something felt off. 10 minutes later, a pair of hikers passed them descending the trail, headlamps already glowing. They offered polite nods, the kind strangers give one another in shared wilderness. Lena almost asked if this path led to the ridge Callum promised, but the moment slipped too quickly. The couple moving past in quiet urgency, boots thudding in rhythm as if trying to outrun the coming dark. Callum kept walking. The trail narrowed further, skirting a steep drop. Lena slowed, placing each step carefully. Mist curled through the trees, a thin veil rolling down from the higher elevations. "Callum," she said gently, "maybe we stop soon. Set up camp before." "We're close," he cut in without looking back. "Close to what?" He hesitated. "Just close." The word felt wrong, both too much and not enough. Silence settled between them like a third presence, pressing, listening. Lena watched his shoulders rise and fall, tense beneath the weight of his pack. Whatever he was chasing out here, it wasn't just a view. 15 minutes later, the trail abruptly widened, flattening near a rocky outcrop overlooking a sweeping valley. The sight was beautiful, undeniably, rolling hills drowned in deepening purple dusk, the faint glitter of a distant stream, but something about the openness made Lena shiver. "This is it," Callum said, almost relieved. "Worth it, right?" She forced a smile. "It's incredible." He finally relaxed, just a little. "Let's take one more picture before we lose the light." Lena lifted her phone, capturing him with the fading valley behind. His smile was small but real this time, edges soft instead of tight. She snapped another of the landscape, then sat on the cool stone, exhaling. "Okay," she said. "Now can we head back to find a campsite before it's fully dark? I don't want to be on this trail in pitch black." Callum didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted toward a faint split in the brush, barely visible. Another path, narrow, unmarked, and steep. "What's that?" Lena asked. "Shortcut," he murmured. "Leads down toward the creek. Might save us an hour." "Callum," she said, her voice low, "we should stay on the main trail." He hesitated again, caught between practicality and stubborn curiosity. The moment stretched, and then he nodded. "You're right. Main trail." Relief washed through her. But when they turned around to retrace their steps, the first rumble of distant thunder rolled across the valley. A cold wind swept upward, rattling leaves, bending pine needles toward the ground. Lena looked at the sky, her pulse quickening. "It wasn't supposed to storm tonight," she whispered. Callum folded the map, frowning. "Forecasts change." And without realizing it, they began walking into the storm that would erase their footprints by morning, setting the stage for every unanswered question that would follow. The first drops fell just as Lena and Callum reached a cluster of wind-bent pines. At first it was only a light mist, soft enough that Lena thought it might pass, but the sky had already shifted into a heavy bruise of gray, swollen with more rain than the forecast had ever suggested. Callum looked up, wiping water from his forehead. "We need to hurry. The trail will get slippery fast." Lena felt her heartbeat climb. The storm had rolled in unnaturally quickly, like something descending with purpose. "Let's find a spot to set up camp," she said. "Somewhere sheltered." "We're close to the lower trail," Callum replied, squinting ahead. "If we push a bit more, we can reach that creek and—" Another crack of thunder split the sky, sharp enough that Lena flinched. The wind surged, scattering loose needles across the ground. "No," she said, louder this time. "Callum, we need shelter now." For a moment he looked ready to argue. But the rain intensified, spilling from the sky in hard, icy sheets. His shoulders dropped in reluctant agreement. "Fine. There's a flatter patch just past those rocks. We'll camp there until it passes." They hurried toward a small clearing half hidden by sloped granite. The rain soaked through their jackets instantly, the cold biting. Lena fumbled with the tent poles, her fingers numb, while Callum anchored the corners against the rising wind. "Hold it tight," he shouted over the storm. "I'm trying." The tent shuddered violently as another gust struck it. Lena's hair whipped across her face, her breath trembling. When the shelter finally stood upright, crooked but functioning, she crawled inside and pulled her soaked pack after her. Callum joined a moment later, dripping and breathless. The temperature dropped rapidly. Outside, the forest groaned under the assault of the storm, branches snapping, leaves tearing loose, the wind howling through every open pocket of air. Rain hammered the thin fabric of the tent, loud enough to drown their breathing. Callum wrung water from his sleeves. It came out of nowhere. Lena hugged her knees. "Do you think it'll last?" "Storms this time of year usually burn out fast," he said, though his voice lacked certainty. "We'll wait it out, leave at first light." But dawn felt impossibly far away. Hours passed with nothing but the relentless drumming of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. The storm swallowed all other sounds, birds, insects, even the usual nocturnal rustlings. Lena felt enclosed in a strange void, where the world outside had been erased. At some point during the night, Callum fell asleep, head resting against his pack. But Lena stayed awake, heart pounding with every blast of wind that rocked the tent. She kept thinking of the unmarked trail Callum had noticed earlier, the one he'd insisted was a shortcut. Something about it gnawed at her. Around 2 a.m., a deafening crash shook the ground. The tent lurched sideways. Lena gasped, scrambling upright. "What was that?" she whispered. Callum jerked awake. "Tree fall, maybe. The storm's ripping the place apart." For a while they sat in silence, listening. The forest shifted and moaned in a way that felt alive, angry, almost. The storm had taken total control, reshaping the night. By morning, the rain finally softened to a heavy drizzle. Mist clung low to the forest floor, thick and milky. The world felt blurred, edges smudged. When Callum unzipped the tent, the smell of wet earth and shattered pine hit them instantly. The trail they had followed the previous evening was gone. Completely gone. The runoff from the storm had carved small ravines through the dirt, washing away footprints, landmarks, even the subtle depressions left by other hikers. Mud coated everything, slick and unpredictable. Callum's face tightened. "We'll need to reorient." Lena stepped out carefully, her boots sinking into the saturated ground. "Can't we just follow the same direction we came from?" "That's the problem," Callum said quietly, scanning the landscape. "It all looks different now." They packed in silence, focusing on each movement, as if any distraction might swallow them whole. The clearing felt unfamiliar, the trees strangely rearranged. Even the air seemed heavier, dense with the storm's residue and something else Lena couldn't name. When everything was packed, Callum unfolded the map, squinting at it. "We head south. The creek should still be there," he said. "Once we find water, we can track the trails again." Lena nodded, though uncertainty clung to her like damp fabric. Together, they stepped into the altered forest. Hours later, long after they should have reached the creek, long after the sense of direction began to unravel, only two things remained certain. They were no longer on the trail. And by the following afternoon, search teams would discover this very campsite abandoned. Silent evidence of the night the storm erased every sign they'd ever been there. By the time the storm cleared and the sun rose weakly over Yosemite, Lena and Callum were already 24 hours overdue. At first, no one realized it. Overdue hikers were common: late starts, twisted ankles, phones losing signal. But when the second night passed with no contact, the park dispatch logged them as missing. At dawn, Ranger Elias Rowe stood at the trailhead where the couple's car sat alone, its windows fogged with early morning condensation. He rested a hand on the hood, still cool to the touch, and exhaled slowly. He had a familiar feeling, one he had grown to hate. Not another one. Elias radioed in. Car confirmed. Starting grid search with Team A. We'll spread toward Tenaya Canyon. His voice was calm, but his jaw was tight. He remembered too vividly the cases where bad weather and bad choices turned simple hikes into tragedies. By mid-morning, more rangers arrived, followed by volunteers, dogs, and a search and rescue drone team. Maps were unrolled across the hood of the command vehicle. Coffee steamed in paper cups. Anxiety hung in the air like smoke. Elias addressed the group. Storm damage is severe. Trails are unstable. We don't know which direction they went off the main route. Move slow. Look for anything. Scraps of fabric, disturbed brush, gear. These storms erase everything. He didn't need to emphasize the urgency. They all knew time was already slipping away. A few hours into the search, a ranger shouted for Elias. Found something. Elias jogged through the wet undergrowth toward the voice. A strip of torn nylon, bright forest green, was tangled in a low branch. Lena's backpack strap. Elias felt his stomach drop. He crouched, brushing the frayed edge with gloved fingers. Wind didn't do this, he muttered. Storm dragged them through something rough. Animal? The ranger asked. Maybe. Or terrain. Elias scanned the area, noting the fresh slide of mud and rocks. The storm had carved the hillside into unpredictable shapes. Nearby, faint impressions hinted at footprints, but the rain had smudged them beyond recognition. The forest felt unsettled, like something had passed through violently and vanished. An hour later, word spread that the victims' families had arrived. Elias braced himself. He found Marina Ward, Callum's older sister, standing rigidly at the trailhead. Her eyes were red, not from crying but from holding back tears too fiercely. She clutched a jacket, Callum's spare windbreaker, folded tightly in her arms. "Are they alive?" she asked without greeting, her voice cracking at the edges. "We're doing everything possible," Elias said gently. "We found a piece of Lena's pack. It means we're in the right area." "That's not an answer," Marina whispered. "Why weren't they found sooner? The storm wasn't even forecast. Shouldn't you have warned them?" Elias took the blow quietly. "Weather shifted faster than predicted. We can't control that. But we're searching now." Marina looked away, jaw clenched. Callum would never go off-trail. He always follows the rules. He plans everything. Elias hesitated. "We've seen hikers make unpredictable decisions under pressure." She glared at him. Not Callum. Her refusal to believe any alternative stirred tension around them. Families often clung to certainty, until the wilderness forced them to face darker possibilities. As the day wore on, searchers pushed deeper into the canyon. They found more traces, a granola wrapper, a broken branch pattern suggesting someone had slipped, and at one point, faint drag marks in the mud. Elias studied them, troubled. "They were struggling here," he murmured. Later, a volunteer mentioned seeing a blurry shape in an old trail camera half a mile away. "Could be Lena," he said. "Could be someone else. Hard to tell." Elias felt a familiar unease. Storms hid tracks, erased clues, twisted timelines. But they also exposed secrets that the forest couldn't hold forever. As dusk approached, Elias stood at the edge of a ravine, staring at the water rushing below. Somewhere in this broken terrain, the truth waited, buried under mud, fear, and whatever had separated Lena from Callum. Behind him, a ranger approached. "Sir, they found a damaged camera near the old ridge line. Footage might show something." Elias turned sharply. "Get it to base. I want eyes on it tonight." Because sometimes, a single frame could unravel everything. The trail camera arrived at the command post just after nightfall, its metal casing dented, mud caked deep into the hinges. A ranger placed it on the folding table where Elias stood reviewing the day's findings. The device looked as if something had slammed into it. Hard. "This is the one they found near the old ridge line," the ranger said. "It wasn't recording when they picked it up, but the SD card survived." Elias nodded, exhaling slowly. "Let's see what we've got." Inside the command tent, a small generator buzzed, powering laptops and radios. Volunteers sipped lukewarm coffee, their faces drawn with fatigue. The storm had left everyone raw, but the possibility of footage stirred a quiet tension. Even Marina, who had insisted on staying despite being told to rest, hovered near the entrance, her arms wrapped tightly around her torso. Elias inserted the SD card into the laptop. The screen flickered, pulling up a list of time-stamped clips. Most were from days before the storm. Deer crossing the trail, shadows shifting through the undergrowth, a bear wandering too close to the lens. Normal wilderness patterns. Nothing unusual. But the final clip was different. The timestamp showed it was recorded the night Lena and Callum went missing. "Play it," Marina whispered. Elias hit the spacebar. The video opened in near-total darkness. Rain streaked across the lens, blurring the world into watery smears. The sound was a chaotic hiss, the storm raging, branches whipping violently against one another. For several seconds, the frame was empty. Then a shape lurched into view. A figure, small, hunched, moving unsteadily, stumbled across the lower left corner of the camera's field. The silhouette was unmistakably human, soaked and trembling, hair plastered to the face. The figure clutched something close to the chest, something the rain made impossible to identify. Lena. Elias leaned closer to the screen. Pause. He zoomed in, enhancing the grainy image. The person was alone, wavering, terrified. Her eyes flashed briefly toward the camera, wide and wild, before she staggered forward again, disappearing into the storm-blackened trees. Callum wasn't with her. Marina pressed a hand to her mouth, her breath trembling. "Where's my brother? Why wasn't he there? Why was she alone?" Elias didn't answer. The questions were sharp, but the footage offered no explanation, only a haunting fragment. He played the rest of the clip. A few seconds later, the camera jostled violently, the lens tilting downward before static overtook the screen. "The storm must have knocked it loose," the ranger said quietly. "Or something else did," Elias murmured. Marina's voice rose. "You think Lena left him? You think she abandoned Callum?" Elias straightened. "I'm not making assumptions. But the footage tells us this. She was moving fast, she was alone, and she looked terrified." Marina shook her head fiercely. Callum would never let her wander off by herself. "Something happened. Something's wrong." Her words echoed in the tent, settling into the dim corners like dust. A young volunteer stepped forward timidly. "Maybe she went for help?" "Help from what?" Marina snapped. Elias intervened. "We won't know until we find them. Tomorrow, we'll sweep the area where this footage was taken. It's the first solid lead we have." He copied the clip onto a tablet, loaded batteries into his headlamp, and stepped outside to breathe the cold night air. The forest loomed as a dark mass beyond the tents, branches dripping with leftover rain. Somewhere out there, Lena had run through this storm, frightened enough to abandon the main trail, frightened enough to leave Callum behind. Elias felt an unease growing inside him, a feeling he had learned to trust over his years in search and rescue. There was something wrong about the way Lena moved, her frantic, stumbling gait. Something wrong about the object she held to her chest. Something wrong about the direction she had been heading, away from the ridge, but also away from safety. Hours later, when most of the team had turned in for rest, Marina remained awake. She sat alone near the command tent, staring at the dark outline of the forest. Elias approached her quietly. "You should sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." Marina didn't look at him. The jacket she was holding. "Do you think it was his?" "It's possible," Elias said carefully. "But we can't know from the footage." She closed her eyes, pain trembling through her voice. If she had his jacket, then where was he? Elias had no answer, only the growing certainty that tomorrow's search would change everything. At dawn, before the teams departed, another ranger jogged toward Elias, breathless. "Sir, you need to see this. We found something near the creek. Blood." Elias froze. The camera had shown the last moments Lena was seen alive. But what they found next would point to the first sign of real violence. The next morning arrived not with sunlight, but with a cold, metallic silence that settled over the valley like a warning. Deputy Hale moved ahead of the small search team, following the faint gorge that ran parallel to the last confirmed ridge sighting. The terrain was sharper here, steeper, older, carved by centuries of storms and winter ice. It felt wrong, somehow, as if the forest itself had been holding its breath since the couple vanished. He wasn't expecting to find anything. Not after so many false trails. But then his radio cracked with static, and a shaky voice whispered, "Hale, you need to see this." He reached the granite shelf minutes later. It jutted out from the mountainside like a broken tooth, slick from last night's rain. Two volunteers stood frozen at its center. One pointed toward a jagged patch of rock near the edge. At first glance, it looked like nothing, just a dark smear. But as Hale crouched and touched the stone, his fingers came away stained a deep rusty red. Blood. And not a drop or two. A violent, desperate spray marked the granite, scattered in small arcs as if someone had stumbled or been dragged. The sight punched a hole straight through Hale's composure. This wasn't a simple fall. Something had happened here. He signaled the team to widen the perimeter. The forest around them seemed suddenly smaller, its silence heavier. Every shadow looked like it held a secret. Every gust of wind whispered something they weren't ready to hear. One volunteer swallowed hard. "You think it's his?" Hale didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he studied the surrounding area. Nearby brush was flattened. Pine needles disturbed. A torn strip of fabric, forest green, soaked and clinging to a branch, fluttered weakly in the breeze. He recognized the color immediately. Her hoodie. His stomach tightened. He examined the ground closer. Scratches in the dirt. Slide marks. And there, half obscured by mud, what looked unmistakably like the imprint of a hand dragged downward. "Someone fought here," Hale murmured. Behind him, one of the younger rangers whispered, "But fought who? Or what?" No one answered. As they documented the scene, clouds rolled over the ridge, dimming the light until the granite looked bruised. Hale tried to imagine the couple here a month earlier. Scared, exhausted, maybe injured. Had they argued? Had something attacked them? Or had they been running from something already embedded in the valley's darker corners? He'd seen enough survival cases to know one truth. Blood almost always meant someone was still alive when it spilled. He just didn't know if that would hold true this time. A few minutes later, Hale noticed something odd, a faint trail leading away from the bloodstain, running between two boulders and down toward a thick cluster of cedars. It wasn't a path, not one any hiker would choose. But the broken branches and disturbed soil told a story of forced movement. Someone had gone through there. Someone who wasn't walking easily. Hale lifted his radio. "I've got a direction. We move now." But as the team shifted, a sudden metallic glint near the base of the granite caught his eye. He knelt and brushed away needles. A zipper. Attached to a small, mud-caked pouch. He opened it carefully. Inside were two items, a cracked GPS unit and a folded piece of paper, warped by moisture but still legible around the edges. On it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "If you find this, we didn't get lost." Hale froze. The wind lifted, sweeping cold air across the granite. Somewhere in the trees below, something rustled, slow, deliberate. He stood up, clutching the note, feeling the weight of what it meant. This wasn't just a disappearance. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous. And whatever truth lay beyond those cedars was waiting for them. Waiting in the dark. The trail leading away from the blood-stained granite grew narrower with every step, swallowed by cedar roots and jagged stones. Deputy Hale moved first, pushing branches aside, the damp note still clenched in his gloved hand. "We didn't get lost." The words pulsed in his mind with every breath. They weren't just a clue, they were a warning, one the forest seemed determined to bury. The cedars parted suddenly, revealing a drop-off sharper than any map had suggested. Below stretched a narrow canyon, dark, twisting, carved deep into the earth. Hale had seen it before from afar, but standing at its edge was different. The air shifted here, heavy, muted, as if the canyon absorbed every sound before it could fully exist. Even the wind hesitated. One of the younger rangers, Mateo, whispered, "Feels like the place is listening." Hale didn't respond. He was listening too, straining for the rustle of animals, the chatter of birds, anything. But the canyon gave nothing back. No echoes. No insects. No life. It was as if the valley itself refused to acknowledge what lay inside. They descended carefully, boots sliding on loose shale. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became. Hale heard only his own breathing, loud and unnatural in the vacuum. Mateo tested his radio. It emitted a jitter of static, then went dead. "Signal's gone," he said, voice small. Hale nodded grimly. Expected it. At the base, the canyon floor unfurled in a maze of uneven rock, boulders coated in moss, and patches of soil disturbed by something, or someone, forcing their way through. It matched the direction of the drag marks they'd found near the granite. Someone had come this way. Someone who had bled. They followed the disrupted trail until it reached a point where the canyon walls closed in like jaws. Here, the rock on the right was streaked with a familiar dark brown. Dried blood. Hale crouched and touched the surface. The stain was smeared downward, as though a hand had dragged across it. His pulse tightened. Mateo swallowed. They were alive when they came through here. The canyon absorbed his words instantly. No echo. No return. Hale stood, scanning the narrow passage ahead. It funneled deeper into shadow, barely wide enough for a single person to squeeze through. Beyond it, the darkness thickened. Something metallic glinted in the dust near the wall. Hale knelt again and brushed debris aside, revealing a snapped plastic strap and a broken carabiner. Backpack gear. The woman's, most likely. He pocketed the pieces, then raised his voice slightly. Lights on. No splitting up. Their flashlights pierced the gloom, cutting pale beams across the claustrophobic walls. Even the lights seemed to dim unnaturally, swallowed the moment they touched rock. 10 minutes in, the passage widened abruptly into a hollow chamber. A shallow pool of rainwater sat at the center, reflecting their beams like fractured glass. Hale scanned the ground carefully and stiffened. Footprints. 2 sets. One smaller, one heavier. And beside them, drag patterns. Mateo crouched. Looks like she was supporting someone. Or someone was supporting her. Or she was being forced, Hale replied quietly. He stepped further inside. Something near the pool caught his eye, tangled strands of medium brown hair clinging to a stone. Long light. Human. Her hair. He felt his chest constrict. The chamber walls rose high and uneven, streaked with mineral deposits. At the far end, a narrow tunnel sloped deeper underground. The edges were scraped, as if someone had clawed at the stone. Hale approached it slowly. The dark air drifting from it felt colder, heavier. Wrong. Mateo hesitated behind him. "Sir, whatever happened here?" They were terrified. Hale didn't disagree. The silence pressing against them seemed almost deliberate, like the canyon was holding its breath, waiting for them to move closer. He shined his light into the tunnel. For a brief second, something shifted in the darkness, too fast to define, too silent to trust. But it wasn't an animal. Hale's voice tightened. "We're not alone down here." The canyon swallowed his words whole. And the tunnel ahead beckoned deeper into the nightmare. The tunnel's darkness pressed against them like a living thing, but Deputy Hale forced himself forward, each step cautious on the uneven stone. Something had moved. He was certain of it, but whatever it was had vanished as quickly as it appeared. Behind him, Mateo kept close, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The air grew colder, sharper, and soon the narrow passage gave way to an open stretch that sloped downward. A faint trickling sound echoed somewhere ahead. Water, faint but steady. It was the first sound the canyon hadn't swallowed whole. Hale motioned for Mateo to follow as they descended the slope. The tunnel opened into a dry riverbed, wide and pale beneath the thin cracks of light spilling in from above. Smooth stones lined its floor, bleached by sun and time. A thin stream wound through the middle, weaving like a silver thread between the rocks. The moment Hale stepped onto the riverbed, he saw it. A splash of green against the pale stones. Not foliage. Not moss. Fabric. He felt his heart slam once against his ribs as he moved closer. The object lay half-crumpled on the rocks, soaked, torn, dirt-stained. The color was unmistakable. Forest green. The same hoodie the missing woman had been wearing in their last photo. Her jacket. Mateo exhaled shakily. Oh God, that's hers. Hale crouched, lifting the garment carefully. The fabric was heavier than it should have been, waterlogged and stiff in places. As he unfolded it, a dark streak ran across the inner lining, brownish, crusted. Blood. Not fresh, but enough to confirm a struggle. He swallowed hard. This wasn't a simple fall or disorientation. Someone had removed the jacket. Or she had taken it off while hurt. Or someone had taken it from her. The riverbed wind brushed across the stones, cold and unnatural, almost whispering against the canyon walls. Hale didn't like how it felt, how the air seemed to shift around the jacket, as if the valley remembered what had happened here. He checked the edges of the garment again, searching for tears or claw marks. One sleeve was shredded. The tearing wasn't clean. Thread stretched outward like something had yanked it violently. Mateo spoke softly. Do you think he was with her when this happened? Hale didn't answer immediately. Someone was, he murmured finally. But whether they stayed together. His voice trailed off. He didn't finish the sentence. Couldn't. He turned his attention to the rocks surrounding them. There were faint indentations in the mud near the waterline, footprints distorted by erosion. A pair of tracks staggered unevenly before vanishing into the deeper stretch of the stream. The flow was too shallow to drown prints entirely, which meant the river had risen recently or someone had intentionally walked through the water to hide their trail. Another detail caught his eye. Small pieces of gravel were disturbed in a pattern leading away from the tracks. Dragged stones. Something heavy had been pulled along the riverbed. The silence thickened. Hale stood, scanning the canyon for movement. The hair on the back of his neck rose. There were no birds, no insects, no rustling. Just the faint trickle of water and the oppressive weight of the valley holding its secrets tight. He tucked the jacket into his pack. They needed it analyzed. More importantly, they needed to understand why it had been left here, and where the trail went next. Mateo pointed downstream. Look. The riverbed narrows further down. Maybe whatever dragged through here kept going. Hale nodded. We follow the water. It's the only lead we have. They moved cautiously along the stones, their footsteps muted by the canyon's strange acoustics. The walls rose higher, darker, closing them in with every turn. The riverbed twisted sharply left, and as they rounded the bend, Hale felt an inexplicable drop in temperature. Something lay ahead. Something half buried in silt and shadow, caught against the jagged roots of an uprooted tree. Hale's breath froze. A shoe. Small. Worn. Familiar. And beside it, something pale. Something human. The river had carried more than just a jacket. For a moment, neither Hale nor Mateo moved. The shoe lodged in the riverbed roots looked like a gravestone, and the pale shape beside it, half submerged in silt, held the air between them hostage. Hale raised a hand slowly, signaling Mateo to stay behind. Every instinct in his body prepared for the worst. A month missing. Blood on the granite. A torn jacket. It all pointed to death. But when Hale stepped into the shallow water and knelt beside the figure, he froze. The shape wasn't a body. It was a cast-off mannequin torso, sun-bleached and cracked, likely swept downstream from some distant campsite or forgotten storage shed. Someone had stuffed a handful of pine needles into its hollow chest, making it look chillingly human from afar. Mateo let out a strangled exhale. Jesus. I thought. Someone put this here, Hale said quietly, interrupting. Mannequins don't wander into canyons on their own. He scanned the riverbed again. No other footprints. No sign of who placed it. Just the hollow, watching silence. The discovery didn't comfort him. It unsettled him even more. Someone was playing with the landscape, manipulating fear. Whether it was the missing man, the woman, or someone else entirely, he couldn't yet tell. Hale straightened. We need to get back topside. Expand the search east. Mateo nodded, eager to leave the canyon's oppressive quiet. They climbed the sloping rock shelf that bordered the riverbed, gripping roots and ledges as they pulled themselves upward. Light sharpened as they ascended, until they reached a thin break in the canyon wall that opened into dense pines swaying in the wind. The moment Hale stepped into the trees, he felt it. Sound. Real sound. Wind rustling needles. A crow calling somewhere overhead. The world returned like breath after suffocation. Hale almost didn't realize how deeply the canyon's silence had seeped into him until it finally released. Mateo emerged behind him. Feels like we crossed into another world. Maybe we did, Hale murmured. They walked several yards into the trees, scanning for boot prints or broken branches. The sun hovered low, bleeding through the forest canopy. Hale checked his watch. Nearly dusk. They'd need to radio base soon before night swallowed the trail. But then, a crack. A soft, deliberate snap of twigs somewhere ahead. Both men stopped. Hale raised his hand again. Mateo froze. Another sound followed, faint footsteps, uneven, dragging. Not an animal. Human. Hale's pulse kicked. He stepped forward slowly, pushing through the pines, eyes locked on a cluster of shadows between the trunks. A shape emerged. Limping. Shaking. A woman. Her hair hung in tangled clumps, wild and matted with dirt. Her face was hollow, streaked with dried mud, cheeks sunken from hunger. Her hands were scraped raw. Her clothes, what remained of them, hung in tatters. Barefoot, stumbling, she moved like someone caught between consciousness and collapse. Mateo gasped. Is that? Hale's throat tightened. It's her. The missing woman. She stepped into a shaft of fading sunlight, blinking as if the brightness hurt. In her fists, clutched against her chest with desperate force, was an object Hale recognized instantly. Dark fabric, torn, soaked stiff with old mud. Her partner's jacket. The one he had been wearing the day they vanished. She held it like a lifeline. Her lips trembled. Don't go back, she whispered, voice shredded. Please. You can't go back down there. Hale approached slowly, palms up. You're safe now. We're here to help. She shook her head violently, stumbling backward. Panic flared in her eyes, wild, feral, almost animal. You don't understand, she rasped. He's still down there. But he's not. Her breath hitched. A distant howl echoed from the canyon behind them. Low. Wrong. Not a wolf. Not anything Hale recognized. The woman collapsed to her knees, clutching the jacket tighter. He's not the same anymore. The pines shuddered in the rising wind. And Hale realized the true nightmare was only beginning. Hale knelt beside her as the forest wind rattled through the pines, scattering needles across the ground. The woman, Lena, shivered violently, still clutching the mud-stiff jacket to her chest as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the world. Mateo stood a few feet back, radio in one hand, torn between calling for rescue and staying completely still. Every instinct told him that even a sudden breath might fracture what little stability Lena had left. Hale spoke softly. Lena, you're safe. No one is going to hurt you here. She flinched at the word safe, eyes darting toward the canyon they'd just escaped. The last light of dusk turned the jagged opening into a black mouth. She shook her head, breath hitching. You shouldn't have come down there. We had to, Hale said. Your tracks led us. We found your jacket. We found signs of a struggle. Lena closed her eyes tightly at the mention of the jacket. Her fingers curled protectively around it. For a moment, he thought she might shut down entirely. But then something inside her cracked, quietly like a branch under snow, and she whispered, "I tried to warn him." Hale leaned closer. "Warn who?" "Your partner." Her breath trembled. "Evan." It was the first time she'd said his name. She pressed the torn jacket to her face for a heartbeat before lowering it again. "We weren't lost. Not at first. We knew the trail. We'd hiked it before. But someone, kept leading us off it." Mateo frowned. "Someone else was out there?" Lena hesitated, then nodded. "At first we thought it was another hiker. We heard footsteps behind us the second night. Slow, stopping when we stopped." Evan called out, but no one answered. Her voice grew fragile. Then the storm came. It was so loud, we couldn't tell if the footsteps were real anymore. But when the rain cleared, we found tracks circling our camp. She swallowed hard. Bare feet. The forest seemed to still. Hale kept his tone steady. "Did you see who it was?" "No," she whispered. "Just shadows in the trees. A shape moving where it shouldn't." Evan said it was a trick of the light. But later, he changed his mind. "How?" Hale asked. Lena stared at the jacket in her hands. "He saw it." "Saw what?" Hale didn't ask yet. She was unraveling the truth on her own, and he needed her to continue. "We tried climbing out of the ravine the next day," she said, voice trembling. "But the canyon, it does something to sound. You can't hear if someone is behind you until they're already there." Mateo shifted uncomfortably but stayed silent. Lena continued. "Evan slipped on the granite. Cut his arm bad. He was bleeding. A lot. We tried to bandage it, but he got weaker. Slower. And whatever was following us," her voice lowered to a whisper, "it got closer." Hale felt cold settle into him. "Lena, what happened the night you lost him?" Tears welled in her eyes. "He heard something near the riverbed. Said it sounded like a woman calling his name. He thought it was help. I told him it wasn't. It couldn't be. But he went anyway." Her shoulders shook. "When I caught up, he wasn't alone." Hale's pulse sharpened. "Who was he with?" Her expression collapsed into terror. "Not a person," she choked. "Not anymore." The forest darkened as the sun slipped away entirely. Lena clutched Evan's jacket so tightly her knuckles whitened. "He fought it, whatever it was. I tried to pull him away, but—" she gasped. "He told me to run. Told me not to look back." "What did you see when you did?" Hale asked gently. She shook her head violently. "I won't describe it. If I say it out loud, it'll feel real again." The wind picked up, carrying the distant echo of something moving far down the canyon. Lena's eyes snapped toward the sound. "He's still alive," she whispered. "But he's not Evan anymore." Her voice trembled. "And he's coming." The forest held its breath. Lena's warning hung in the air like frost as Hale steadied her against a fallen log. Mateo raised his flashlight toward the canyon's direction, but the beam seemed to wither before it touched the tree-line. Somewhere below, something moved, slow, heavy, deliberate. Hale forced his breathing to steady. "We need to get you out of here," he said. But Lena shook her head, trembling violently. "No. If you try to take me too far from the canyon, he'll come faster. He follows sound. He follows movement. And he knows my scent." Hale exchanged a glance with Mateo. They couldn't stay. Nightfall was swallowing the landscape, and whatever was coming knew these woods better than they ever could. "Lena," Hale whispered, "listen to me. Evan may be alive, but if he's not in his right mind—" She interrupted, voice cracking. "He's not in anyone's mind." Her fingers dug into the jacket. "It used to be him, before the storm, before the blood loss, before it found him." "What is it?" Mateo asked. Lena's eyes darted toward the pine shadows. I only saw its shape once. It was just a blur at first, like something made of smoke. But when it touched him, it changed him. It used him. It wore him. Hale felt a chill crawl along his spine. We need to move. Now. They helped Lena to her feet. She winced with every step, her bare feet torn from days of fleeing through the wilderness. Mateo led the way east toward a ridge that cut back toward the trailhead. They moved quickly, skirting between pines and granite slabs, but never far enough from the canyon for comfort. A sound followed them. Not quite footsteps. Not quite breathing. Something between the two. Hale stopped. The forest stopped with him. Then, snap. A branch breaking in the distance, followed by a low, almost curious exhale that chilled the bark of every tree around them. Lena whimpered. It knows we're leaving. Go, Hale whispered. They hurried up the ridge. The moon began to rise behind the granite towers, spilling pale silver across the forest. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the ground, bending in strange angles. Mateo kept glancing over his shoulder, his face drained of color. Halfway up the ridge, Lena stumbled. Hale caught her before she fell, but her hand slipped from the jacket, and it dropped to the ground. Something moved instantly. A blur of darkness flickered between the trees below, fast enough that Hale barely registered the shape. Tall, thin, hunched at the shoulders, moving on limbs too long to be human. A distorted outline draped in shredded clothing. Evan's shredded clothing. Lena screamed, a sound ripped from pure terror. Mateo fired a warning shot into the air, and the echo rolled across the canyon. Finally, a sound even the forest couldn't swallow. The creature jerked back, then froze. Its head turned toward them. Not smoothly. Not naturally. Like a broken puppet controlled by invisible strings. Run! Hale shouted. They sprinted up the ridge, branches lashing their legs. The creature surged forward, crossing 20 yards in seconds. Hale could hear it, wet, uneven breaths, the scrape of bone or something like bone dragging across stone. Lena sobbed. Evan, please, stop. For a fraction of a second, the creature hesitated at the sound of her voice. A flicker of something human stirred beneath the twisted silhouette. Then it vanished again, overtaken by whatever wore him. The ridge crest appeared ahead, a strip of moonlit earth leading to open ground and the distant glow of ranger station lights. Almost there. Mateo yelled. Behind them, the creature lunged. Hale shoved Lena forward just as Mateo grabbed her arm. Together they dragged her across the ridge. The creature leapt, an impossible arc of shadow and limbs. And then, spotlights, voices, rangers. The creature halted at the tree line, retreating into blackness like smoke dissolving into night. Lena collapsed, sobbing into the dirt. Hale stood frozen, staring into the pines. Whatever had taken Evan was still out there. Still watching. Still waiting. And the forest swallowed the last trace of him without a sound.